Hello and welcome to World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Zhou in Beijing. Coming up on today's program, Japan pulls out all the stops to keep a close military alliance with the U.S. But will the new Trump administration get in the way? And ASEAN works overtime to get the regional comprehensive economic partnership off the ground, with a big push from China. Well, we'll begin today's show in Japan, where U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter arrived to reinforce the existing military alliance between Tokyo and Washington. But what came as a big surprise is that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced that he will visit Pearl Harbor with U.S. President Barack Obama at the end of the month. When Japanese imperial forces bombed Pearl Harbor back in 1941, an attack that drew the U.S. into the Second World War. Since Donald Trump's election victory in November, Japan has been in frequent contact with the U.S. But does that mean closer ties? Let's take a look.
Tokyo and Washington are working hard to forge a stronger alliance. On Monday, Secretary Carter arrived in Japan, his last visit as head of the U.S. Defense Department. And this time, his visit comes with a token of sincerity, a plan to return some land in Okinawa to the Japanese government by the end of the year.
We share your commitment to the realignment and are prepared to make the largest land transfer in the history of our alliance.
Japan and the U.S. are traditional military allies. Japan hosts nearly 50,000 American troops and pays about $1.6 billion a year for their upkeep. Recently, Japan announced a plan to deploy the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, a U.S. Army anti-ballistic missile system.
This Japan-U.S. alliance does not benefit just Japan, but also both Japan and the U.S. mutually. Even under the next Trump administration, this Japan-U.S. alliance will remain important not just for Japan and the U.S., but also for Asia-Pacific region and the world.
But the traditional arrangement may change. During the presidential campaign, Trump threatened to pull U.S. troops out of Japan unless Tokyo pays more.
And as far as Japan is concerned, I want to help all of our allies. But we are losing billions and billions of dollars. We cannot be the policemen of the world. We cannot protect countries all over the world where they're not paying us.
To ease the concern, Prime Minister Abe took a series of diplomatic initiatives. A few days after Mr. Trump's victory, Abe made an unofficial visit to the U.S. and had a meeting with the president-elect to maintain a relationship with trust. And Abe was the first foreign leader to meet Mr. Trump in person after getting elected. This week, Abe also announced a visit to Pearl Harbor with U.S. President Barack Obama at the end of the month. Although the Japanese leader did not make an official apology for the World War II bombing of the harbor, he will be the first Japanese leader to visit the naval port. Abe also arranged to meet with Mr. Trump a week after his inauguration. And despite Tokyo's efforts to win over the president-elect and the outgoing U.S. president, how its alliance with Washington shapes up will only be determined when Mr. Trump decides his foreign policy once in office next year.
And for more on how the U.S.-Japan alliance is shaping up, we're now joined in our Beijing studio by Mr. Teng Jianxun, the Director of American Studies Department at the China Institute of International Studies. And in Hong Kong, we have Mr. Yuichi Shimutsu, a former editor of Japan Times. And later on, we will be joined by our analyst from D.C. Let me start with you, Mr. Teng. Some believe that Ashton Carter's visit to Japan is to consolidate, of course, Japan-U.S. military alliance. But the problem is Ashton Carter's term, actually President Obama's term, will serve out in about 70 days. So what kind of alliance will be looking like between Japan and the U.S. during Trump administration?
There are at least two possibilities we can see at this moment by the new administration of the United States. Donald Trump might, continue the momentum to intensify the relations with Japan, because Japan has been a very important ally in this region, and in order to, consolidate the defense posture of the United States in this region, I'm sure the United States will continue the momentum to intensify the capability of the United States. And another possibility is, as Donald Trump said during the campaign, and he might reduce the presence of the United States, especially its military, in this region. In my opinion, I think the future, Donald Trump, the president-elect, will continue the momentum. So this is my assessment.
What is your take? You think it is going to be a stronger or weaker military alliance between the U.S. and Japan?
Well, we're really in the preliminary phase, and Donald Trump is a very good tactician, a businessman, and he's basically playing upon the rivalry between Japan and China. And he realizes that Japan is the easier party to deal with because it's more dependent on the U.S. China is much more of a force on its own. So, of course, he's going to play this game right now when it doesn't cost him anything. He's not president yet. He has no strategy really developed yet. This was pointed out by his appointee as Defense Secretary, James Mattis, who co-authored a book with George Shultz, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State. It was published by the Heritage Foundation, in which they called for a strategy both globally but also for Asia in particular. So it's going to be quite a while, a real shakedown, before Donald Trump's team does have a real policy to Asia. Right now, this is just preliminaries and just jockeying for some position.
And during his campaign, he has been saying that Japan should pay more for the military expenses of the U.S. troops stationed there. And recently we heard the Japanese defense minister saying that might be difficult because Japan has already paid very much. Do you think the Japanese will stomach a much bigger bill for defense because of the U.S. Military presence there?
Well, Japan's own defense budget has been really ratcheted up. It's been rising about 2% a year. It's about $50 billion now. So Japan's had no hesitance in terms of building up its own military forces and is preparing to take over some of those American military bases. So I don't think there's a real problem of paying for the bases. I think Japan would like to see transfer of those bases to Japanese control. Now, that said, what's really going on right now with Ashton Carter's visit, why he's in such a rush to get to Japan and India, that's to close all these arms deals. The United States is supplying Japan with F-35 attack jets, shipboard missiles to attack other ships, and anti-missile systems for aboard ships, along with electronic warfare system. So the Obama administration right now is trying to cash in for Lockheed and other defense contractors right now. That's the hurry right now and what this is all about. So Japan has been willing to pay, for weapons. Shinzo Abe basically has a very militaristic outlook and has no hesitation to take out a checkbook for weapons.
But we understand there is also debates within Japan about what is Japan's relations with the U.S. should be looking like. Analysts say Japan's rightist forces are actually hoping to get rid of the U.S. Control as their long-term goal. But obviously, Abe here wants to consolidate U.S.-Japan alliances. What do you make of the disconnect?
Well, the problem is, I think everybody in Japan knows that any nuclear umbrella is going to come from the United States. Japan cannot do it alone because the Japanese people, because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, will not support that. If Abe actually announces a nuclear strategic capability, he'll be voted out of office, and that'll be the end of that, and the peace constitution will stay the same. On the other hand, I think he's really playing with fire right now. I don't know if anybody recalls, but today is December the 7th, and it's very special. It's the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And Shinzo Abe plans to go there at the end of this month, and he's not going to make an apology. He's only going to go there for remembrance. And we have to remember, this is what got America into the Pacific War. 2,000 servicemen were slaughtered there without warning. And so this is not going to go over very big with Donald Trump's nationalist populist supporters. I think Abe is walking into a death trap for himself politically.
Now we have another guest on the line, Mr. Douglas Powell, the Vice President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Mr. Powell, what is your take on the future U.S.-Japan relationship will be looking like? There were a lot of harsh words from Donald Trump during his campaign against China, against Japan. What is the Asia policy of Donald Trump be looking like?
Well, the most important thing he said during this campaign was that Japan should pay more to defend itself. That's something that Mr. Abe wants to do anyway. So having some foreign pressure on the Diet to increase the budget suits his political purposes. I think that's going to be a source of trouble. Moreover, Japan by itself feels threatened by China, and the United States feels that by itself, without Japan, we can't provide adequate protection for our interests in East Asia. So there's a mutual need for the U.S. and Japan to stay close together based on objective realities rather than just on sentiments.
But it seems it's not something the Japanese politician can stomach, either to increase the military expenses from Japanese side, or weaker alliances with the U.S. To counter China's rise?
I don't think there's any room in the Japanese political scene for someone to try to separate from the U.S. The days of leftist politics ended in the early 1990s in Japan with the end of the Cold War. So I don't expect to see that kind of development. And there is plenty of room in the Japanese budget for increase up to maybe 1.5% of GDP in the next few years.
Let's talk about Trump's foreign policy in general, because many people still don't know exactly how Mr. Trump will carry out his foreign policy. So far, he has only chosen his defense secretary and national security advisor. He hasn't chosen Secretary of State. But it seems there are still a lot of unknowns about what's got to be the focus of Trump's diplomacy and what kind of resources he's going to invest in. What is your take, Mr. Paul?
Well, like everybody else, I don't really know what his intentions are. So I have to fall back on analyst tools. And the analyst tools say, look at the fundamentals. What is driving American interests, whether it's in the Middle East with Russia, Europe, or in the Far East with Japan and China? I think in those cases, he's going to be driven by the fact that we have very large trading relationships, very large security relationships, and association of values with many of the parties that we have alliances with, that will be a source of continuing connection, continuing mutual reliance going forward, despite the rhetoric of the campaign and despite some of the confusing signals that have come out during the interim period.
Mr. Teng, what do you think Donald Trump will inject into the trilateral momentum among the United States, Japan, and China?
I think on one side, the president-elect will continue the momentum, will enhance the relations with Japan. And on the other side...
Enhance, not weaken.
Yeah. And on the other side, he will continue the good relations in cooperation, like the regional affairs and international affairs, and also in trade. And it seems to us he just trying to manage the United States as a company. He now in recent 1 month, he has chosen a lot of candidates for the officials in the administration. And
so you are saying
it's quite unusual.
He's treating country-to-country relationship as a business.
Yeah, as a business. And on one side, he will enhance his relation with Japan in security, and on the other side, of course, he will continue the trade cooperation with China, because the market, the potential capability in production and other aspect gave the two countries a lot of opportunity. For example, the production of a cell phone, actually the production chain, the high level the United States possess the intellectual copyrights and some other products, and the Chinese side only produce the cell phone. So there are a lot of complementarities between the two sides. This is actually, I think, will continue the cooperation in the future.
Another thing is TPP. Mr. Abe has been a proponent of this trade agreement, actually. And now with Donald Trump in power, TPP is thrown out of the window. How will that change the trade relations between U.S., Japan, China, and U.S.?
And I think Donald Trump might choose a bilateral trade relations, not a multilateral approach to have trade cooperations, because any bilateral cooperation in trade will give a great advantage to the United States, rather than a multilateral approach to do business. This is actually a very specific interest for the United States and for Donald Trump, because he would like to be the key player in any trade cooperation, not in the general consent. So this is a very important change for the future economic and trade cooperation between China and the United States, between U.S. and Japan.
And Yoichi, this must be one of the reasons why Mr. Abe rushed to to New York to see Donald Trump as president-elect before everything. What do you think he wants to get out of Donald Trump in the field of trade agreement?
Well, yeah, Trump's emphasis on the trade imbalance that the United States suffers with Asian countries, this is finally going to be addressed after decades of America running these trade deficits. So Shinzo Abe, the Japanese side, have a lot more to lose in the sense that their major exports are automobiles, and the Americans, of course, they can build very fine cars themselves. So there's going to be massive competition, and if the Trump camp comes through with their promise of imposing a 45% tariff on imported goods, the price of your average Lexus is going to skyrocket. The Chinese situation, while China has a much larger trade volume, a lot of that smaller consumer goods, cheaper stuff you find at Walmart, which can take a 45% tariff, but electronics are going to be a lot harder to shift back to the United States because they take a lot of labor power, especially in the inspection phase. So I think the promise of tariffs and punitive measures, that when it comes down to reality is going to have to go through the Commerce Department. It's got to be sector by sector, country by country, item by item. This is going to be a long process of negotiation. So right now, I think that constructive engagement between Chinese industry and the Commerce Department, between the Chinese government and the State Department and the Pentagon, that's the best approach.
Okay.
Policies aren't set yet. There's not a clear-cut strategy. So just show sort of a general idea of what has to be done to get America out of this trend toward losses of jobs and economic decline.
So, Douglas, can we take Donald Trump literally when he say that he will slash punitive tariffs on imports 45%, or it's just campaign rhetorics? He won't deliver on that.
Well, I mean, there's a potential to make some individual tariff increases by exploiting the International Trade Commission's findings on dumping, for example. So it's possible that Chinese steel or aluminum could be assessed a tariff because they're being, it's not in the American market. And if they do have a tariff, they usually are in the range of 400 to 500%, not 45%. So, but they would not be substantially affecting the bilateral deficit. The other side of Mr. Trump's domestic program is for tax cuts and a big increase in infrastructure spending, which probably are both good things for the U.S. But the inevitable law is that will turn into a bigger trade deficit, not a smaller one. And these various measures on trade products, whether it's automobiles or steel or something else.
Now let's step away a little bit from TPP. jump into the story on Tuesday. Trump, again, sent out another tweet. His Twitter diplomacy mentioned that this deal with Japan, Japanese tech giant SoftBank, will pour $50 billion into the U.S., which is expected to create 50,000 domestic jobs in the U.S., something that Donald Trump welcomed. And he even said he should claim credit for this. He said SoftBank would not do this had he not won the election. So it seems Mr. Trump's economic policy will be quite different from his predecessor. How will this change the economic transaction between the U.S. and Japan and U.S. and China, Douglas?
Well, if the U.S. can be made to be more investor-friendly, that's going to be a good thing for employment, good thing for general economic growth in the U.S. That probably Trump has talked about separately, which is a lower tax rate on businesses in the U.S. If he gets through Congress, which I think he can, that should invite a lot of return of American investment from overseas as time passes and attract some new investment. If the infrastructure $1 trillion plan goes through, there'll be a lot more interest from foreign companies to get involved in that, and it would bring more jobs to the U.S. market.
And Mr. Tone, do you think that might be a good news for China, because China has the urge to invest and also to establish factories overseas, including the U.S.?
We can say this is a good news for Chinese people, but I think this is actually a political deal by the Japanese company. To some extent, it's a political deal or gift to the president elected by Prime Minister Abe, because he is going to meet Donald Trump 7 days after the inauguration of the U.S. president next month. So that might be a political gift for the coming president of the United States.
So you're saying this is not just a business deal? There are
to some extent,
undertones.
I think the Japanese are very good at this regard, to make deal with the counterpart from the United States.
And Yoichi, you think this deal has more than just a business deal of making more jobs in the U.S.? Briefly.
Well, Donald Trump is riding on a lot of enthusiasm, wants to keep his base of, middle-class Americans, working people, very happy with that prospect of jobs, but he really didn't examine this deal. SoftBank is basically coming over into the financial services sector to loan money to startup companies, and that the main, and of course SoftBank already owns Sprint, a major telecommunications company in the United States, a very controversial deal that members of Congress felt very uneasy about. But also much of that fund is basically Saudi money. Trump has already said the United States is not going to buy Saudi oil. He doesn't want Saudi investment. And here it's being channeled through a Japanese company. So I think he's got to be a little bit more careful than just his little tweets now. He's getting closer to the presidency, and he's got to have a cabinet who can vet all of these deals and make sure. You remember how Bill Clinton, I think, was seen with a Colombian drug lord. He probably didn't know the man, but later he found out the man was a cocaine lord from Colombia. This is not good for American presidents, just to open the door to anybody who walks in.
Well, at least for now, we don't know the makeup of his advisors in the international relations field. But thank you very much for your takes on this. Thank you, Dr. Spao, Yuichi, and also Ms. Vita, for your take on this. And you've been watching World Insight here on CCTV News. Don't go, we'll be right back. When we come back, China lends a hand in speeding up ASEAN's regional mega trade deal, the RCEP, which is still in the works. Welcome back. Talks on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership are underway in Jakarta. Well, RCEP is an ASEAN-led proposal for a regional free trade area. It would initially include the 10 ASEAN member states and nations with existing free trade deals with ASEAN, such as China, India, Japan, and South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Well, RCEP is now the only mega regional trade agreement open to Asia-Pacific countries. China seeks to speed up the RCEP negotiations, keeping in mind ASEAN's key role in the talks.
Delegates and ministers from 16 countries in Asia-Pacific are meeting for the 16th time in Jakarta to drive negotiations over the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. It was launched in 2012 by the 10 ASEAN member states, along with 6 other regional partners, including China, Japan, and Australia. With the uncertain fate of the Trans-Pacific Partnership under Donald Trump's presidency, the nations involved are looking to benefit from this free trade agreement, ambitiously backed by China, the world's second-largest economy.
We have already achieved agreement on economic and technical cooperation. Now our focus has shifted to agreeing on core areas concerning small and medium enterprises, investments and competition policy.
RCEP is already the most appealing option for leaders wanting to secure regional stability. This new framework could shape the future for Indonesia, especially in line with President Joko Widodo's focal point of making China a regional ally. Although the agreement looks promising, few obstacles still lie ahead.
It is not easy to combine different interests and come to an agreement. We are trying to cater to all of the country's needs and keep in mind the different strengths and weaknesses of each participant from developed and developing countries. It is a very tough job.
Experts say the RCEP could offer the best solution for trade liberalization and to further increase growth in Asia and beyond. If the RCEP were finalized, it will provide a platform for more open trade and investment in the region that would ultimately contribute to global economic growth and development. It brings together countries with a combined GDP of more than $20 trillion and provides global income benefits of $260 billion. Silkina Aluwalia, CCTV, Jakarta.
So what does RCEP mean for member states? We're joined in the studio by Mr. Xu Sitao, the chief economist of Deloitte China. In Singapore, we have Mr. Henry Gao, an associate professor of law at Singapore Management University. And in Washington, D.C., we have Troy Stangoroni, the senior director of the Congressional Affairs and Trade of the Korea Economic Institute. Let me start with you, Sitao. This is the 16th round of RCEP talks. Many countries are now looking to have some kind of agreement because already we understand the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is thrown out of the window. They hope they can have a multilateral trade agreement. But what is China's role in this, and what is the likelihood that they can reach any kind of agreement?
Well, precisely as what you have said, given the fact TPP is dead, so RCEP is basically the only game in town. Now, that's going to accelerate the process because so far it has taken a long time for countries with very diverse background to talk to each other. But I think now the process is going to be accelerated. And there's no doubt China is going to take the leading role. It's going to set the trend. Again, given the fact Chinese economy accounts for more than half of this potential trading bloc.
And Henry, what is in the way of reaching any kind of agreement this time? What are the ASEAN's concerns, and can China help to alleviate those concerns?
Well, the concerns would be, how to assemble this very diverse group together and try to create something that is really meaningful, because you have the ASEAN countries and you have some developed countries, and also two of the largest developing countries in the world, China and India, both in the group. And I think many of the ASEAN countries and India, for example, in particular, they are going to have some concerns, especially India. They are very reluctant to push for trade liberalization. So a big question mark would be whether or not they will be willing to do it in the RCEP.
And from the U.S. perspective, obviously Donald Trump is not in favor of a multilateral trade framework. How does America look at the RCEP agreement that is initiated by ASEAN, obviously encouraged by China? Choi?
Well, Mr. Trump has talked often about how he feels the United States needs to pursue bilateral trade agreements rather than multilateral agreements. That being said, I think that there is also a lot of support still, both within Congress and amongst many others, for multilateral agreements. The difference becomes RCEP and TPP were two very different types of agreements. RCEP looks to take and remove many of the tariff barriers that were in place between many of the Southeastern Asian countries and China, South Korea, and others, to where TPP looked to take and eliminate many of the barriers that companies face behind the border. And so I think you'll still see, whether it be through bilateral or multilateral forums, the U.S. look to try and remove those behind the barrier borders.
Okay, let's look at the differences between the two agreements a little bit, RCEP and TPP. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership has 60 members, excluding the U.S. On the other hand, the Trans-Pacific Partnership includes 12 countries around the Pacific, with 7 countries that are parties to both, including the U.S. but not China. In terms of significance in trade and GDP, the two groups do not have much difference. RCEP members have 12% of the world trade, TPP 13%. In terms of global GDP, RCEP covers 29%, TPP 36%. Well, the biggest difference is that RCEP covers 45% of the world population, while TPP only covers 11%. So there are some differences, but as Troy just mentioned, they also focus on different areas.
Yeah.
So RCEP is considered more inclusive because it does not transcend those national boundaries, as Troy just mentioned. So it is more easily to have agreement under the RCEP framework. Is it correct?
I think you may say the bar is lower for RCEP, and also because all these countries, they have natural trading relationship. They are all scattered in the same region. And TPP is more diversified, right? You have countries in Asia Pacific, you also have countries in Latin America. The bar arguably is much higher because given environmental considerations and labor, so on and so forth. But there's no point to talk about TPP at this point. As I said earlier, RCEP is really the only game in town. But I think potentially RCEP can go beyond Asia Pacific.
Henry, do you think the RCEP framework will become an example for other Asia Pacific countries to maybe follow and join if it becomes successful?
Yes, I think RCEP, if it's successful, could become a template for a future regional agreement covering all Asia Pacific countries, because if you look at the member countries of RCEP, it includes every possible categories of Asia Pacific countries. You have some of the largest developed countries like Japan and Australia, and you have some of the largest developing countries like China, India, and you have some of the smaller developing countries like the ASEAN members, and also small but rich countries like Singapore. So RCEP, if it's successful, can really provide a model for future trade liberalization across Asia Pacific.
And Troy, you just mentioned that there are two different kind of trade deals. Do you think RCEP will have any possibility to include the U.S. into any kind of agreement, or it maybe include some elements and aspects of TPP into this new framework?
I think U.S. involvement in RCEP in the short term is unlikely. In the long term, it's something that's definitely possible. The U.S. would most likely need to take and negotiate an FTA agreement with ASEAN first, given my understanding of the accession agreements within RCEP, and then that might be possible. But I do think as the negotiators look at RCEP, one of the things they should do is try to look at TPP, the U.S.-Korea, the Korea-EU FTA, and other modern FTAs and see what types of innovations these agreements have that might help all the parties moving forward to make trade between each of them easier as well.
And another thing is that they talk about is both versions have a lot of geopolitical undertones because obviously one agreement has China in this, one has the U.S. Taking the lead. So how much of geopolitical momentum is playing the rules for trade deals?
Okay, actually, until recently, I think China became quite receptive to TPP. Of course, before the surprising result of the U.S. election. But I think if you want to make RCEP a genuine success, maybe we want to de-emphasize the political element to make that more as economic integration and less a political document, because otherwise it may just take very long time.
Henry, from your perspective, do you think there is any geopolitical undertone?
Well, I think it's okay to include geopolitical considerations. If you look at the RCEP and the TPP, you can see that China and the U.S. actually have different visions with regard to the geopolitical concerns. The U.S., as Troy mentioned earlier, through their involvement in the TPP, is trying to change the domestic regulatory framework of many of the TPP members. So it's a bit more intrusive. But the RCEP is mainly aimed at dismantling the tariff barriers. So that is something which I think most countries, at least most developing countries in Asia Pacific, would be more comfortable with, because they are not really comfortable with the idea of somebody, like the U.S. come in and tell them how they should structure their regulatory framework, how they should, institute certain rules and so on. So I'm not against geopolitical considerations in principle, but I think the different approaches taken by China and the U.S. with regard to the RCEP and TPP shows that they have different visions, and it seems as of now that probably the Chinese version find more resonance in this region.
And Choi, as we all know, Donald Trump is a businessman. So do you think when he conducts trade talks, he has less geopolitical baggages as his predecessor?
I think so. One of the things that he is primarily concerned about is creating jobs in the United States and ensuring that we don't lose jobs to competitors overseas. So I think what he's going to focus on is how can he take and create a deal that will bring the most benefits to the United States. He's really focused on this. We've seen in the run-up to his inauguration, both in terms of trying to negotiate the deal with Carrier to stay within the United States, and how he's talked more and more about restructuring the incentives for companies to be involved in the United States. So I think you're going to see focuses in the U.S. on things like tax reform, efforts to make the U.S. a better environment, but on trade you'll see the same things. Deals that will try to make the U.S. more attractive for investment.
But he's not interested in having any kind of multilateral trade agreement with Asia-Pacific countries.
At this point, it doesn't appear so. He seems to be very concerned about these agreements. That being said, I think one of the key things we need to remember about RCEP is that I think it actually is very important for RCEP to move forward. We're at a point where we're seeing, TPP is unwinding, the Doha round unwound. The EU almost was unable to take and move forward with its FTA with Canada because of one province in Belgium. I think we're at a point to where we need some positive news on the trade front, because we've seen a lot of setbacks recently.
But obviously, Donald Trump wants a better deal with all his trading partners. But that won't be easy. China is a big trading power. ASEAN is a big trading power. What do you think the future of trade deal frameworks?
I think it's going to be challenging. I do agree with Troy. I think Donald Trump is going to do something very drastic on tax cut front. But as he said just a couple of days ago, there's a good trade, there's a bad trade, there's dumb trade. So I do think there will be more trade frictions. But of course, it's still too early to say. I mean, we don't know what he's going to do in the first 100 days. But I think more trade frictions really is.
But it's going to be constructive or destructive?
Well, depends, right? Depends whether initially China and the U.S. would play hardballs against each other. I hope, I just hope, as I said, we haven't heard many good news in the past. I hope we are going to get some good news.
Well, we don't know yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sitao and Henry and Troy for your analysis and insights on this. And that's all for today's program. If you'd like to see more, you can definitely visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine, or you can check out our YouTube channel if you live overseas. From me, Zoe, and everyone from the team, thanks for watching. Goodbye.